Good morning and welcome to our presentation. My name is Isabel and my colleagues Karine and Vivian and myself will be presenting today on climate adaptation within and for Ghana's business sector. As Chris mentioned, our colleague Gianna cannot be with us here today, but we also want to acknowledge and thank her for all of the work she's done up until now. This policy lab was sponsored by the Ghana Climate Innovation Center, or GCIC, which is an incubator focused on climate-related small to medium-sized enterprises. We'd also like to thank Ruka, Dramani, and the entire GCIC team for all of their support and help they've given us throughout this process. Today we'll be going through the following items. First, a brief introduction into our challenge question and the main climate impacts that Ghana faces. Second, we'll be diving into the key insights our team found through literature review and stakeholder consultations, with stakeholders both within Ghana and in comparable countries also interested in climate adaptation. Third, we'll do a brief high-level overview, which introduces the pathway through which we suggest Ghana builds up its economic resilience to the ongoing climate crisis. Fourth, we'll talk about our 4 categories of recommendations, and in conclusion, we'll revisit the main goals of this policy lab. So, as Krish mentioned before, we're going to say it again, our challenge question is the following. What leading fiscal policy practices from comparable developing countries might support Ghana's goals in building a business environment focused on climate adaptation? Throughout our extensive research, we narrowed down our research question to focus only on climate adaptation. While climate mitigation, or the prevention of greenhouse gas emissions, is crucial in targeting the main impacts that come from the climate crisis, climate adaptation, or the response to these climate impacts, is essential in targeting the prosperity and longevity of Ghana's economy. Ghana also has relatively low greenhouse gas emissions at only about 0.11%, and historically has not been responsible for the changes in climate that we see today. At the same time, however, Ghana remains highly vulnerable to climate impacts, such as erratic rainfall patterns and more. And these can cause catastrophic floods as well as long periods of drought. The agricultural sector of Ghana's economy is hugely important due to its high proportion of employment within the country. The agricultural sector therefore also contributes greatly to economic stability in Ghana. However, this is also the sector most exposed to climate impacts and increasingly frequent extreme weather events. The most impacted group within the agricultural sector are smallholder farmers, making these stakeholders crucial and very vulnerable, but also extremely crucial in climate adaptation strategies. Smallholder farmers are incorporated into Ghana's business economy as entrepreneurs, and so bolstering their potential as businesses will contribute to the sustainable development of Ghana's economy in the long term. As a result, our Policy Lab mission is to come up with fiscal policies that improve smallholder farmers' access to capital so as to improve their capacity and potential for incorporating and implementing climate adaptation strategies. Throughout our extensive research as well, after completing a literature review and stakeholder consultations, the team compiled a list of key insights, which are the following: significance of agriculture, importance of implementation, financial risk, opportunities for technology, and finally, educational landscape. First, significance of agriculture. The agricultural sector is the major economic engine of Ghana, comprising of 39% of Ghana's labor force and 18% of its GDP. However, again, as mentioned before, this is the sector most impacted by the climate crisis, and often has, due to this, economic instability, loss of livelihood, and food insecurity. Within the agricultural sector, smallholder farmers become key players and therefore are crucial to climate adaptation strategies. Next, importance of implementation. Although Ghana has well-planned and comprehensive climate adaptation strategies and frameworks, there is limited capital and intermittent financing for the costs of these adaptation strategies, and so therefore has not been ineffective on a large enough scale. Third, financial risk. There is a high level of financial risk in the climate adaptation investment sector. Although entrepreneurs are willing to invest in climate adaptation because they know that it is important, There are a lot of barriers, including uncertain future payoffs, high and irreversible initial costs, and a lack of complete climate risk knowledge. And these are major impediments to investment. Fourth, opportunities for technology. Innovations of technology such as crop monitoring systems and early warning systems are essential to improving the farming practices within Ghana and help farmers respond to whatever's going on, including things such as erratic rainfall patterns. However, these lack funding and a collaborative implementation approach within the business sector. Finally, educational landscape. Climate knowledge sharing and application of climate adaptation strategies does not effectively amplify resilient farming practices. Smallholder farmers mostly are aware of climate change, but do not take actions to mitigate the impacts of climate change on their farming practices. And so as a result, climate change education itself is of lower priority, but education on effective climate adaptation strategies with local ecological knowledge incorporated into it is essential for building up the resilience of smallholder farmers' businesses.
Informed by our key insights, we have developed a framework in which we can start thinking about how best to tackle the challenges that Ghana is facing in implementing climate adaptation within the business sector. At the root of our framework is a strong monitoring and evaluation system. All of our fiscal policies are guided by a robust and contextualized monitoring evaluation system so that there is effective implementation of our policy recommendations. Our policy recommendations are then supported by the stakeholders whose partnerships facilitate our recommended actions. And then our policies fall into three categories to ultimately generate the production and the income of smallholder farmers. The first we must tackle is the fact that smallholder farmers often lack access to capital. And their income is further inhibited by the fact that climate change is destabilizing their crop production and destabilizing their income. However, the thing that usually stabilizes income, which is insurance, is failing smallholder farmers in the face of climate change. Traditional crop insurance does not make the distinction of losses either due to climate change or due to farming failure. So this is becoming a riskier investment and one that smallholder farmers do not have the capacity to turn to more expensive but more climate adaptive farming practices. So only once their smallholder farmers' income is further generated and stabilized will they have the capacity to turn to land protecting methods. These land protecting methods will ultimately generate the income of smallholder farmers in a more sustainable manner and ultimately generate the income of Ghana overall. However, land protection and fiscal literacy will not take off on the ground unless there is effective education of smallholder farmers on the importance of these policy recommendations. So within our first category of policy recommendations, innovations for financing, we are tackling the root cause as to why smallholder farmers do not have access to capital. And this is often the case that smallholder farmers lack access to formal financial institutions for multiple reasons, some being they live in very remote areas, others being that credit and loans require high collateral or high interest rates require collateral. And in the case for female smallholder farmers, there are strong patriarchal norms that are impeding these smallholder farmers for accessing these formal financial institutions. So as a result, we are recommending an informal financial institution called Village Savings and Loans Associations, VSLAs, and locally known as SUSUs. These formal financial institutions are not externally funded. They are self-managed groups such that members in a close proximity within a community come to save their money and distribute small loans to its members. These associations help promote financial literacy of their smallholder farmers, as well as good financial habits, and it concentrates a potential number of customers in one region. So with all these benefits, formal financial institutions are more likely to extend their services to these association members. VSLAs already exist in Ghana, and so we recommend that A, the government of Ghana and GCIC take a participatory approach in amplifying the impact of VSLAs through international partnerships. These international partnerships include, for the government of Ghana to partner with the International Fund of Agriculture and Development, which is already co-providing $77.99 million to support smallholder farmers in Ghana. However, they only support formal financial institutions, so we recommend that this fund is extended to VSLAs. Other partnerships could include the World Bank, since the World Bank has already helped implement VSLAs in our comparable country, Malawi. And further, we recommend that GCIC partners with international organizations whose main goal is to amplify VSLAs. And this partnership includes CARE International, which is already operating in Ghana to amplify VSLAs. However, there's a problem with VSLAs, and it is that it does not actually target the most poor and most vulnerable smallholder farmers. And this is because it requires a small contribution to remain a VSLA member. And so we recommend that B, the government funds these memberships for the most poor and the most vulnerable smallholder farmers. And in that, this policy recommendation will be a pro-poor policy and one that reduces poverty overall in Ghana. And finally, our case study in Malawi has demonstrated that VSLA members may be exposed to exploitive attempts by microfinance institutions, and there may be conflicts within the VSLA associations themselves. So we recommend that C, the government strengthens the regulatory protections for VSLA members. This can be done on top of Ghana's current efforts to strengthen their formal financial institution regulations, and this will ultimately lead to a more viable and credible association, VSLAs, which will ultimately lead to the uptake of this policy recommendation. Now that we've tackled the generation of income for smallholder farmers, we are working to stabilize their income. And this is done through insurance. As mentioned earlier, traditional crop insurance are failing smallholder farmers in the face of climate change because it fails to distinguish losses due to climate change or due to farming failures. As a result, we are recommending a relatively new and innovative form of insurance, which is called weather index insurance. And this insurance does make the distinction. So we recommend that A, the government of Ghana develops a weather index insurance scheme. This is a costly endeavor and one that the government of Ghana cannot do alone. So we recommend that through partnerships, international partnerships, such as the World Bank Commodity Risk Management Group, that it helps develop this insurance scheme. The World Bank Commodity Risk Management Group has already implemented weather index insurance in Malawi, and this is the case study of which we look to for lessons learned and success. However, Ghana does not have the current infrastructure in place to apply adequate weather coverage. So we recommend that B, the government invest in weather stations coverage to mitigate basis risk. Basis risk arises with weather index insurance when the measurement of the index does not perfectly match the individual's insured losses. So then the smallholder farmer is double paying. She is paying for the insurance, and then she is paying for the losses in her crop that is not covered due to the erratic weather. So for effective implementation of weather index insurance, the government must invest in adequate weather stations to build the credibility of this insurance scheme and ultimately build up the uptake of this policy recommendation. So now that we've tackled the fact that now that we've tackled smallholders farmers, generation of income, as well as the stability of their income, only then will smallholder farmers have the capacity to start thinking of land protection methods. This first recommendation within this category is tree planting. Tree planting regenerates the soil. It also protects crops against extreme weather events. And so this is a very viable climate adaptation strategy, but this is already happening in Ghana. However, it is lacking the scaling up due to high initial costs. So we recommend instead that the government, A and B, provides tax rebates for smallholder farmers and private businesses that are implementing these initiatives. In tandem with this, though, it must come along with recommendation C that the government of Ghana organize workshops on tree planting, which is a natural regeneration of the soil, so that farmers and the private sector understand the importance of this as a climate adaptation strategy and one that will ultimately lead to greater production for smallholder farmers and income revenue. This can be done through ministries such as the Ministry of Land and Natural Resources. Following that recommendation is climate smart agriculture, which is a land protection method that will boost climate adaptation within the business sector. However, climate smart agriculture, which includes organic input, is costly. Obviously, organic input is more costly than cheap input that is less sustainable. So this is a recommendation, this recommendation is A, for the subsidization of organic inputs to incentivize the scaling up of their use come from international donors. Such international donors include the UN Fund for Food and Agriculture Organization and the Joint SDG Fund. And this also must come with an educational component. So recommendation B targets GCIC to organize workshops for smallholder farmers on the importance of organic input and climate smart practices. This will increase the uptake and the implementation of this recommendation. GCIC can partner with its incubated businesses such as Lakeside Farms and Green Gold Enterprise to then propagate these workshops.
So the third recommendation, which is also under land protection, is supporting agri-technology businesses. Businesses in Ghana that specialize in early warning systems and crop monitoring systems are unable to scale up due to lack of financing. And so we are recommending that that the government subsidizes agri-technology businesses by pulling funds from ministerial budgets that align with climate adaptation goals. But then these subsidies must be given to these companies on the condition that they translate the crop monitoring systems and the early warning systems into local languages in Ghana. The reason why they have to do this is because it will help them to expand their business clients along the different linguistic communities and also lead to an overall growth in revenue in the long term. However, there needs to be a concurrent collaboration to share weather information with smallholder farmers. And so B, we are also recommending that the government enhances collaboration to disseminate weather information. The government can do this by using past pilot projects to continue to strengthen public-private partnerships. And data, historical data and local data that has been collected by the Ghana Meteorological Agency can then be shared with agri-tech businesses such as Esoko and Ignitia, which specializes in early warning systems and local and climate and crop monitoring technology. Doing this will bolster weather information that will be shared with the smallholder farmers and will create a more connected business sector in Ghana. Leveraging partnerships with technology companies such as early warning systems and crop monitoring technologies will help to support smallholder farmers to better predict erratic weather patterns and climate changes. It will also enhance crop production resilience. Now, moving on to the next, the third category, which is education, we have the first recommendation, which is recommendation 6, farmer field schools. So, what are farmer field schools? These are a participatory approach that brings together about 25 to 30 farmers to solve production problems through sustainable agriculture. They are not new to Ghana. An initiative established farmer field schools for groundnut farmers in the upper west regions and the northern regions in Ghana. However, farmer field schools are also popular in Kenya. They've been in existence since the 90s. But more recently, there have been farmer field schools in Kenya that focus on the inclusion of climate information. So, referring to the successful ACRI project in Kenya, we are recommending that the government of Ghana establish climate-focused farmer field schools in Ghana. And these would help to bolster smallholder farmers' awareness in interpreting weather information, also improving their literacy and integrating local ecological knowledge in climate-smart farming practices. To ensure the full reach of the farmer field schools curriculum, recommend that the government translates the weather forecasts and advisories into local various languages. And finally, since farmer field schools they require a practical learning component in the form of fieldwork, we therefore recommend that GCIC and the government provide resources needed for practical learning components for these farmer field schools. And doing this, the GCIC can encourage their incubated agribusinesses, such as Alliance for Seed Multiplication, to provide resources needed for the practical learning and components of the farmer field schools. Furthermore, we recommend that the government subsidizes these resources such as seeds and farm tools that will be needed for the farmer field schools. This recommendation looks to build skills and climate adaptive farming and effective entrepreneurship in the long term. Now moving on to the next recommendation, still under education, and this is the National Service Scheme. So the National Service Scheme is a compulsory one-year service required of Ghanaian tertiary graduates. Participants are assigned employment postings throughout the country in both like public sectors and the private sectors in fields such as agriculture, health, and rural development. However, a climate-focused field under the National Service Scheme has not been indicated. So we are recommending that prioritizing developing a climate adaptation sector for deployment. This will help to promote income generation for smallholder farmers and the overall income stability. To do this, we recommend that the Ministry of Education partners with an international UN project like ACRI to train the national service personnel. And they'll do this by training them for about 2 months as agricultural extension staff, after which they will be deployed to 2 postings. They will be deployed to the climate-focused farmer field schools that would have been established in Ghana, and also to work with agribusinesses incubated by GCIC. Their deployments will incorporate climate adaptation strategies in the value of chains for the business sector. Cosmos Innovation Center is an agribusiness incubator in Ghana, and they have done something similar. They signed an agreement with the National Service Scheme to allow the personnel to work with the agribusinesses that they incubate. And as such, we recommend that GCIC partners with the National Service Scheme to match their incubated agribusinesses with trained personnel.
Our final 2 recommendations are to do with monitoring and evaluation. So the first recommendation, number 8, is that GCIC should prioritize internal evaluation capacity by applying for grant funds, repurposing their current resources, and partnering with African-led or evaluation organizations for longer-term evaluation capacity building, or ECB. So the aim of this recommendation is to strengthen the reporting and evaluation capacity of GCIC as well as its incubated businesses. GCIC is currently funded by Global Affairs Canada for the incubation support of 240 climate entrepreneurs from 2021 to 2025. Currently, evaluation is performed every 3 months through a subcontract with Ernst & Young Ghana in response to and to fulfill the priorities and goals of Global Affairs Canada's results management framework. In addition, there is also an independent evaluation performed by GCIC's donors on an annual to an 18-month basis. However, these are not holistic enough to empower the growth of GCIC because both of these evaluation functions are to measure the success of funding streams and aren't necessarily for the purposes of GCIC's larger or long-term goals, which for instance might be building Ghanaian economic growth in tandem with climate adaptation. The evaluation function that is being performed by the Global Affairs Canada and donor evaluations is to do with results-based work, whereas GCIC should strengthen its developmental evaluation function, focus on the growth of the organization, and the scaling up of their incubated businesses. So to do so, we recommend the following. A, that GCIC applies for a grant from international foundations, such as the Ford Foundation, so as to improve their internal evaluation support. Why the Ford Foundation in particular? It's just one of many, but it's a foundation which focuses on locally led and decolonized efforts to support projects which address drivers of inequality, and so therefore would be a good fit for GCIC as a Ghanaian organization focused on mitigating the unequal harms that Ghana faces due to climate impacts. B, we also suggest that GCIC could repurpose its current resources through its contract with Global Affairs Canada so as to improve the evaluative scope and again, increase internal evaluation support. The importance of recommendations A and B should not be ignored. Having proper and fulfilled and comprehensive monitoring and evaluation incentivizes more funding, as it also bolsters the credibility of GCIC and their incubated businesses. Finally, C, we suggest that GCIC partners with evaluation organizations in Ghana and local to Africa so as to improve the long-term evaluation capacity building, or ECB. Some possible partnerships include the African Evaluation Association, the Ghana Monitoring and Evaluation Forum, among others. These partnerships can provide networking opportunities and opportunities also to share theories on evaluation, which can also encourage capacity building. We'll move on to recommendation 9, which is that we suggest GCSE should promote the strengthening of a culturally relevant and Ghana-led national monitoring and evaluation framework. Currently, there is a national climate change adaptation strategy, which does prioritize the monitoring and evaluation of various climate practices through the National Climate Change Committee. However, the implementation of this monitoring and evaluation is unclear, and the plan sets out sort of an indicator-based plan, which may not be appropriate for the purposes of building a climate-focused business ecosystem within Ghana. A more fitting plan, would be a comprehensive look in the long term as to the indicators, but also the qualitative measurements which might support Ghana's goals. For instance, partnerships between particular groups of people. So to transform the National Monitoring and Evaluation Framework, we suggest that A, GCIC continues to promote the prioritization of decolonized and culturally responsive evaluation. One tool through doing this could be proverbs, which are a Ghanaian tradition, but also could be a reminder of cultural context, guidance for probing the motives of actions and behaviors, as well as mobilizing local stakeholders to actively engage and promote the local ownership of their evaluation and programs. B, building local evaluation capacity through participatory methods, which would encourage Ghanaians to become co-evaluators and promote evaluative thinking. This has also been done in comparable countries like Rwanda. And finally, C, through the utilization of Ghanaian cultural relevance and participatory methods, a strengthened national framework will promote evaluation data ownership, thereby ensuring policy relevance. In concluding this section on monitoring and evaluation, we acknowledge that though our question posed to us at the beginning of this policy lab was about fiscal policy suggestions, we strongly recommend evaluation as a tool through which to influence and monitor policy at the governmental level. In order for GCIC to make credible demands of the government of Ghana, We suggest that there is robust, culturally relevant, and holistic evaluation taking place at every level within the climate adaptation ecosystem of Ghana. In conclusion, for the success of climate adaptation in Ghana, we recommend that fiscal policies transform the way that smallholder farmers access and contribute to the economy. If we think back to the tree diagram at the beginning of this presentation, we have now presented a policy pathway for Ghana's climate-related business ecosystem to be rooted in monitoring and evaluation, so as to inform fiscal policies. In addressing barriers to our branches of innovations for financing, land protection, and education, the tree will bear fruit well into the future. Thank you.
Shocking, to be honest.
10 minutes for jurors or judges. I'm not sure whether we're calling you judges or jurors. Jurors. Natalie, are you going to manage that?
We'll manage the mics.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Great presentation. My question is more around, so you did a good job of stating how important the labor force is for small holder farmers, 39% of the labor force, 18% of the GDP. Just curious if you can speak to, I guess, what the Ghanaian government is currently doing to kind of foster an environment for climate adaptation. And out of your 9 recommendations, what actually aligns with what they're currently doing? I know you mentioned tree planting, but what else is it that kind of goes in the same direction that they're going in? Because I think for implementation as a stakeholder, you have to have some kind of alignment, right? You can't just like come out of the dark and say, do all these recommendations. So curious if you could speak to that alignment that you have from your recommendations.
So the Ghanaian government is well aware of climate adaptation, and a lot of their national frameworks are in guidance of climate adaptation. However, a major key insight is that though there is significant climate strategy, it often is falling short on the implementation level due to many factors, such as what we mentioned, which is a high initial cost, but also really lacking collaboration as well among stakeholders. And what we found is that there are a lot of support systems to support smallholder farmers. For example, the International Fund for Agriculture Development is co-providing $77.99 million US dollars simply to support smallholder farmers in the agriculture sector as it is. But as we mentioned, there are holes in this framework. For example, it does not support informal financial institutions such as VSLAs, and we recommend that this is a really crucial stepping stone and entry point for smallholder farmers from going into the formal financial institution sector. And regarding the land protection methods, the government of Ghana strongly supports initiatives such as, for example, subsidizing organic input. However, recently the Ministry of Agriculture has rolled back their subsidization for organic input because it was too costly. And this was actually just recent, it was last month. So instead, all of our recommendations for land protection have primarily come through international partnerships so that this could provide leeway for Ghana, who has the metrics range, but up to 88% debt to GDP ratio. So a lot of our recommendations are using funding from international connections. And also, so for farmer field schools, the National Service Scheme and farmer field schools align with missions from the government. So the Farmer Field School has been a long-standing practice in Ghana, but we have found through our research that it is lacking a climate adaptation strategy branch. And so a key insight of ours is that the smallholder farmers do not lack awareness of climate change itself, since they are in relation with the environment all the time. However, they are lacking the critical knowledge on the application of climate smart agriculture, of the use of organic input. And so this is in alignment with their desire to teach about the awareness of their local communities. However, again, there's a hole in the framework that it does not teach about climate adaptation.
So my question, I think, is almost a natural segue from the question and answer, which going back to the assignment that you had, it was to look at fiscal policies that have been applied in other jurisdictions and have been successful. So could you talk a little bit about the success that you've seen, like how you've measured whether or not these policies, these 9 recommendations that you're making have been successful, and where it's weak or non-existent, how you would pitch that in a sense to your sponsor?
I mean, I think the financial part is also.
Yeah. So turning to our comparable countries, how we determine the comparable countries is that we look to countries that were emerging economies, one that was reliant on the agriculture sector and also facing similar climate impacts. So a lot of our research focused on Malawi, Myanmar, Niger, Kenya, Rwanda, and then for the emerging technologies was Egypt, although they do face different climate impacts than Ghana. And so what was actually a big barrier within our own research is that a lot of these countries are struggling with the same things, that they're emerging countries, and so the lack of implementation is also really challenging. So what we would turn to was literature review and impact evaluation of initiatives that were in pilot projects within certain countries. So for example, with VSLAs, the government of Malawi had not implemented any supportive regulatory system to support VSLAs. However, there were lots of impact evaluation that did state the importance and laid out the policy recommendations for the Malawi government, which we then determined whether it was applicable to Ghana. Regarding weather index insurance, we looked at a case, the pilot project of the the World Bank Commodity Risk Management Group had implemented weather index insurance in Malawi. And so there was a very robust amount of research around the opportunities and the challenges. And we learned a lot from the challenges that weather index insurance had in Malawi and the recommendations on how they could move forward. And some of it was that there was a lack of education of smallholder farmers on the agreements of this insurance scheme. So, for example, a lot of smallholder farmers were not aware of what basis risk was. So when there's not an unequal measurement between the index of and the farming losses. So we looked at a lot of lessons learned in these comparable countries and looked at the framework of the fiscal policies that Ghana is already implementing and then how to fill in those holes. Yeah, is that okay?
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I'm torn. I think I may stay on the same theme. I had a different question, but before I do go there, an editorial comment. I think you're well done for focusing on measurement and reporting, because there's an old maxim, one of my former CEOs, what gets measured gets done. So I think it's a very important element. I think I will stay on the same theme. You have focused, and I understand why, on foreign or international support mechanisms. So I wonder whether you gave consideration to regional cooperation in neighboring countries, similar challenges. You've pointed out that you've looked at a variety of case studies, but I would assume that in the case of international organizations, and for use an example, speaking of implementing meteorological systems, that they would be interested in doing that on a regional basis and sharing those costs and so on. So did you consider that sort of regional or cooperative aspect?
So for the regional cooperation, for example, for the recommendation for the farmer field schools, is very popular in Eastern Africa, and particularly in Kenya, because they've been in existence for a long time. And so the reason why we were recommending that Ghana partners with the ACRI project that's already in place is because we've seen the success that's happening in Eastern Africa, in Kenya in particular. And so it's just a matter of them reaching out to them and then partnering with them, because some of the issues that are faced in Kenya, for instance, can be seen in Ghana. But unfortunately for the countries that are much more closer to Ghana, I would say in Western Africa, during our literature review, we did not come across major regional corporations for those stuff yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to for land protection as well as weather index insurance, it all requires inner working and interconnections with the Ghanaian systems. So, example, the Ghana Meteorologic Agency, as well as for land protecting methods, methods of sharing data for early crop monitoring systems and weather index and
Early warning systems.
early warning systems. So there, in our recommendations, we have a strong collaborative component, so that either between the ministries or between the private sector, there is a more communicative approach of sharing data on the importance of showing of sharing data.
And the absolute last thing I'll say on that too is that there are a lot of projects going on in the entire continent of Africa, which would sort of feed into each other in terms of informing the decisions one makes. So I absolutely agree that this sort of collaborative approach within different regions is also extremely helpful. And that's also why we suggested that there is some evaluation collaboration amongst different organizations, both within Ghana and Africa as a whole. So as this information that gets put into a repository gets people get to know the successes and the failures of various projects throughout the continent as well. Thanks. Wow, good timing again.
Okay, well done for timing. Okay, so we may come back to the jurors in our, is this on? Does it matter?
It matters for Zoom.
Is it on now? No? Okay.
I mean,
Grab the jurors mic.
yeah.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, Ruka and Dramani, this also feels like it's on. There we go. Ruka and Dramani from GCIC are up on the screen someplace. So if we've got questions from either or both of you, that would be great for our next 10 minutes. Calling Ruka and Dramani.
Thank you. This is Ruka.
Hold on. We've got, your sound is very weak. Can we strengthen that somehow?
If you read the caption, she says she doesn't have any questions.
Or maybe she can put something in the chat or.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. I was just saying that I actually don't have any questions, but I'm not sure whether my colleague Dramani has any. Dramani?
Hi, to everyone, and thank you, Ruka. Okay, yeah, sorry, I got a notification. I was trying to find out exactly what it is. I think I just have one small thing to clarify, if the team will, and that has to do with the evaluation capacity building recommendation. Could they, within which context are they speaking about monitoring and evaluation? And the reason I ask is that GCIZ is a very small institution relative to what happens within the Ghana ecosystem on climate change adaptation. And in fact, it would not be within our remit. The institution that may have the capacity to roll out a monitoring and evaluation program relative to climate adaptation projects across the country might be the Ministry of Agriculture. So the question is, what is GCIC's role in all of this? Or is this directed at the Ministry of Agriculture and related agencies? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Germani, and nice to hear you. Yes, I think that just to clarify the last two recommendations, the first one was to do only with GCIC in terms of building up the internal capacity of GCIC as well as the incubated businesses. So yes, that would remain within only the scope of GCIC. However, the second recommendation was to do with promoting the strengthening of a national monitoring and evaluation framework. And so in that case, GCIC would not play a direct role in it, but would promote the ideas of having culturally relevant participatory methods continue to be involved in the monitoring and evaluation of climate adaptation practices across Ghana. And so in that case, those are a little bit delineated. And so I hope that clarifies the question.
Okay, anything else from GCIC? If not, then we will open it up to the room. So, any questions? Jimmy? All right, keep your hands up so I can keep it. Oh, yeah, okay. So we've got Jimmy and Dominique and Linda and Daniel and Aftab and holy smokes. Okay.
Should I go?
Let her rip.
Hey, thank you first for that wonderful presentation. I see that you guys put a lot of passion, a lot of effort, so that was wonderful. It's a great start for this couple of days. My question is about, I think it's the second recommendation on the weather index creation and the necessity of creating weather stations. And I know a lot of countries in the global south are heavily indebted, and now given the high interest rates globally, I'm wondering what funding mechanisms can the Canadian government utilize to kind of implement this recommendation while not continuing that debt cycle that they're currently in?
Yeah. Thank you, Jimmy. And very important question, because this is the most costly recommendation of all our recommendations and one that GCIC cannot do alone. So we recommend that it partners with the World Bank Commodity Risk Management Group, as Malawi, which is in a similar state, has partnered with this management group and has implemented successfully weather index insurance. And so our aim of this recommendation is a long-term framework such that we understand that this is high upfront costs, but in the long term, we are hoping that it provides sustainability and a stabilization of the economy as a whole, which will in turn promote the crop production of smallholder farmers, the stability of their income, and in turn produce more sustainable and long-term income generation for Ghana as a whole. So although it has high upfront costs, and one that we recommend is paid for through international partnerships, through a long-term framework, this will ultimately lead to greater income stability and generation for Ghana.
Dom is next.
Hello. Hi.
And Linda is on deck.
Okay. Thank you for such a great presentation. That was fantastic. I have a question about the last recommendations that you explained. During your presentation, you mentioned the partnering of GCIC with local evaluation organizations. What is, or maybe rather are, the benefits of these partnerships?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think that the benefit of partnering with evaluation organizations in Ghana and also within Africa is to create sort of what I mentioned before, this repository of information that organizations, projects, initiatives can pull upon to make sure that the success of climate adaptation practices is ongoing. And that info across international organizations, which fund projects, is also still maintained within Ghana so that they're not lost within the different sort of siloed international foundations which grant money for individual projects. So I think that's one of the major benefits of having a collaboration between evaluation organizations as well.
Linda is next, and Dan Weinstock is on deck.
Perfect. I echo Jimmy and Dom. Great presentation. My question's around the VSLA. So going back, you had alluded to that, in the sector, there are some gender inequalities. So how do you envision that model promoting gender equality more so?
So we had to look at this as a low-hanging fruit. We will not be able to fix gender inequality in Ghana within the formal financial institutions. However, there is extensive literature review showing that VSLAs as an informal institution and as an entry point into formal institutions provides significant gender equity such that female smallholder farmers are finally accessing small credits and loans, and this is bringing greater autonomy, economic autonomy to these stakeholders, these women. So through our case study on VSLAs within Malawi, the literature review demonstrated that with this access to credit and savings, which would otherwise be impeded either by high interest rates and, again, in a patriarchal system where women often cannot own collateral, they have these services. So it showed to improve the decision making both within the household and within the community for female smallholder farmers. It improved female smallholder farmers' ability to turn to more sustainable agricultural practices, such as high quality input, better services such as plowing, and turn to larger crops. So this gave them a large amount of economic empowerment. And additionally onto that, VSLAs got women more involved in connections either with the VSLA members, so it expanded their networks both within the community but also within the market structure itself. So thank you.
Okay, Dan Weinstock is next. We're down to our last 5 minutes. So Dan Weinstock, and then Aftab, and then Niadi online, the coach of this lab.
Hi guys. Is this working?
Yep.
Great presentation. First quick question is that Photoshop or did you guys actually?
Yeah, we visited.
Yeah, we were in
visited.
Okay, good. It's a more serious question. So, if you think about this as recommendations that you'd actually make, like to government, you also have to think about red flags that that you might warn about. One of the ones that interest me is there's a lot of policy borrowing going on in the recommendations that you make quite naturally. Can you see, can you anticipate ways in which caution should be exercised in borrowing one or the other? I mean, just take an example that comes to mind, if any does, where caution might be exercised in borrowing from what might look like a sort of culturally and economically similar society, but where there might be some, the devil's in the details kind of difference that might make something that works in X not work in Y.
That's a good question. That is a good question. I think that when we did pick our comparable countries for case studies, we did aim for sort of a range of countries. And so I agree, there's a lot of policy borrowing within these recommendations, but the hope is that we wouldn't be suggesting a very specific way for Ghana or GCIC to create them for themselves, but rather to take them into their own organizational practices, and with that also include monitoring and evaluation so as to make sure that it becomes well fit to the institution. And I think that sort of route in between all of the sort of little categories of recommendations, as well as its own separate category, makes it become a way in which that the fiscal policies and other policies we've suggested today can become well suited to the context. Thank you.
Okay, Aftab has given me his time. You didn't know that you had given me your time. Niadi is next. And then if there's time, I'm going to ask a question. Ni, are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you. I hope you can hear me loud and clear.
Yeah.
All right. So mine is more of a comment, just to say a huge thanks to the team and also to GCIC. For me, it's been a great learning experience with the team, right? So just wanted to say a huge thanks to the team and to GCIC for this opportunity. There are a few questions that I'll ask, but probably I'll do that offline, right? Thanks.
Thank you, Ni. We look forward to it.
Okay.
So we've got a question online that I'm going to read out. Most of the recommendations, there we go. Hold on. There we go. Most of the recommendations by the team have actually been implemented in Ghana. However, a lot of the time it is the CSOs that are leading climate adaptation and justice initiatives. Which group would you recommend to lead most of the initiatives, governments or private organizations, for a more successful outcome?
Thank you for the question. That's also a really good one. I think that one of the things we noticed in doing both our stakeholder consultations as well as our literature review is that, yes, indeed, a lot of these strategies are already in place in Ghana. However, they're not sort of like centralized and collaborative across the entire scope of CSOs, private businesses, government, and so on and so forth. So I think that has been one of the things we've seen as a major barrier to any of the recommendations we have been trying to come up with. In terms of the second part of the question, as to which group in particular should take this on, we ended up looking a lot at private sector or businesses in general, because that was a way in which we could really have accountability and trust between the timer and trust between different institutions as well, and so that we could manage to track all of this as well. And I think that's part of the reason we ended up looking a little bit more towards the business sector. I don't know if my team has anything else to add.
Okay, if I may, I just have a quick question. One of the things that struck me, it's a good question, it's a polite question, non-hostile question. So one of the things that struck me about your recommendations, which by the way were sequenced very well, one of the things that struck me as being very smart about your recommendations, I had the feeling as we were going through them that for the most part they were recommendations about how to improve an existing thing rather than how, build a new thing. Because governments, I think, generally don't want to build a new thing if you can just make the existing thing work a little better. So now I'm thinking back about your 9 recommendations, and my question is, were all of them that way? So smartly that way? So, or were some of them actually building a new thing? And which ones were building a new thing?
Mostly no. I think any of the ones that were building new things were things like the farmer field schools, which are expanding something or creating a new section of the national service scheme, which was specifically to do with the climate adaptation. But for the most part, they're all building up, and weather index insurance as well is a new thing. But for the most part, they're all building upon an existing system or an existing fund or an existing program. So yeah, they're all about strengthening the capacity that already exists.
I think that's a real strength.
Also, I can add one more thing. The reason why we also did that was also we're looking at a cost-effective way for them to do it. We didn't want to suggest something that would take a long time for them to implement or would be too costly for them. So we had to find
cost-effectiveness. Music to my ear.
Okay. Even onto the innovative weather index insurance is already building on infrastructure that currently is there. It's just strengthening and expanding that infrastructure. So again, we wanted to get the low-hanging fruit and amplify the important strategies that are being implemented in Ghana.
Okay. Very well done. Thank you very much, team. Excellent. Excellent work.